All right. Hi, Ash. How are you doing?
Hi, Dumiling. I'm well, thanks, and you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us in these conversations. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I mean, given how tough things are generally, and so much juggling that's happening, honestly, during this working or living during a pandemic, it is great to join you today.
No, I'm glad you could make time. Really appreciate it. So, Ash, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Ash? Where did you grow up? What did you study? And what do you do currently?
All right. So I am an industrial organizational psychologist by training, and it is largely where a lot of my work currently is. We will get to that at a later stage. But in terms of who Ash is, I grew up partly in the Northwest Province in Rustenburg, where most of my family is still, and some of my growing up also happened in Johannesburg. So I would really say that I partly am the outcome of the migrant worker and the plight of needing to leave what is home and coming to Johannesburg, where everyone is looking for various work opportunities. So that's what brought my parents here. And I always say that I'm also a product of the helping profession. So my mother was a domestic worker by day, my father was a driver, a gardener by day, but both of them were entrepreneurs by night and any other time that they had. So I think a lot of my growing up and schooling was what happened in Johannesburg and influenced by what life between two places and two spaces looked like.
Sure, interesting. It sounds very complicated and interesting. So out of interest, so how much time of your growing up did you spend in Northwest, and how much time did you spend in Gauteng?
Mm. So mostly my time in the Northwest was as a baby, a toddler, and then a bit of primary school as well. So staying with my grandmother and together with the cousins that were also there because, our parents were this side in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
And it's actually an incident that caused my move to Johannesburg. So I got burnt by a candle probably when I was about 5, 6 years old
Sure.
and needing the treatment on this side. My parents then brought me this side, and thereafter, it probably didn't make as much sense for them to move me back because then part of my schooling had started this side, and this is around primary school, grade one, two. And so forth. So we just continued with schooling on this side of the world.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds interesting, and I hope it wasn't a massive tragedy that where you got banned.
No, I think it really is one of those where the reality of what life before there was even electricity was about is, what influenced what happened. And obviously now being that small, a third degree burn would definitely necessitate, more complicated treatment as well. So I am quite fortunate that it didn't necessarily result in the loss of my arm or me even using that, but it definitely changed the trajectory, I would say, of what life could have looked like for me. But I always find that living in Johannesburg, I'm always missing home in one way or another, and I am also still burdened by just some of the needs and the inequality outcomes of what life in a village looks like, and what even for young people things look like now. So it definitely did change things, but also brought about other opportunities in Johannesburg.
Interesting. So that's quite a mouthful what you just said now. And then in terms of your studies, I mean, you spoke about you being an industrial organizational psychologist.
Yeah.
So what do you study to be able to get into that space?
All right. So, in essence, the things that I majored in are industrial psychology, human resource management, and psychology. And when I was starting out, and this is years ago, before information was as readily available, and especially information in a South African context, in doing my research, I knew that even from the things that interest me and what I'm good at, that I was drawn to the business side of things, but not as much your accounting and economic or financial sciences in any way, because that is not my forte,
Yeah.
I must say. But I also knew that, I was very curious about people and curious about life. So in during my research, started coming across industrial psychology more in the United States, a little bit in Europe, and then came across institutions in South Africa offering that, University of Johannesburg being one of them. So that is actually where my journey started. Where the open day that I went there to attend with a few friends, I got to then find out that there's a course that marries both worlds. So the industrial psychology course that UJ offered was a BCom,
Okay.
so a Bachelor of Commerce qualification, but there is also a BA alternative. So a BA in psychology, where then after the 3 years of undergrad, you can then go on to do industrial psychology in your honors year, and then go on to do masters in that. But in my case, it was a BCom industrial psychology degree that I started with. Then I did an honors in industrial psychology, and having studied full time, I still had the energy to still continue with studies, and I was also studying on a bursary. So that's also one of the things that definitely helped my family and allowed me to pursue my formal education as much as I did. So it was a 6-year degree. Process really from first year all the way through to masters, and at least I was fortunate and blessed in the sense that the bursary also covered the full journey. So having done an industrial psych masters, I then went on to do an internship, because that's also another thing with psychology on the professional side. If you're seeking to either register as a psychology professional in South Africa with the Health Professions Council of South Africa, you
Yeah.
would still need to do more work once you are done with the degree, once you have graduated. So it's the internship, which is a 12-month internship, and thereafter I wrote the board exam, and then I could finally then register and start practicing as an industrial organizational psychologist.
Sure. It sounds like a very long, very intense journey, and I like some of the things you've mentioned that you had a bursary. Did it cover your full 6 years? And if that's the case, that then means you did it in record time, which was your 6-year period as well.
Yeah, so it is quite a valid question that you are asking, because those type of bursaries aren't as easy to come by, and I think we know even in our own context how just uh, a lack of funding is what ends up being a barrier to furthering education or even pursuing dreams. People sometimes even give up. So definitely it wasn't an easy journey for me, as much as the bursary did cover everything, and in terms of tuition, books, and all of that, but you still have to live. So although I lived at Res, and there are some benefits to that, because you can actually do life with other people and you don't feel the financial burden as much if you're cooking together and this and that. But there were still things that my parents had to make a plan for financially. But the bulk of my educational needs, at least, were covered by that bursary. And I actually remember how in my honors year, that is actually the first time that I had a laptop that I could call my own to work with. It had been almost 4 years of nighttime at labs, doing assignments and things like that. So that just shows how even with a bursary, sometimes it isn't as easy, but definitely made a huge difference, considering that it would have meant that my parents cash out their retirement policies early so that I can actually continue with studies. So, and even when we got that call for this bursary, I remember we were in Rustenburg at the time in December, just spending time with family and being home, and we had just fetched water from a communal tap and all of that. And as I closed the gate, I got a call for a number that I can't actually quite place. I didn't know where this call was coming from. And that's actually when I got the news that I got this bursary. And I had been the only person who applied for an industrial psychology bursary, and there was only one company that was offering that. So it
Wow.
really is one of those unique situations where after more than 11 rejections on my bursary applications, to have that call, it felt so surreal, to have that coming in at that time. But also another thing that I remember about my journey, is that it wasn't a straight line. And that's also one of the things that I tell people a lot, life and career It's not a straight line, in a sense that you have your dreams, you have your aspirations. I thought that I would actually complete everything in record time. It
Yeah.
wasn't actually the case. So my undergrad, that went very well. Graduated cum laude there and had confidence now in honors, but then honors was much harder. Academic writing doesn't come naturally to me, things like that. But I did finish that within the 1 year that I had enrolled for. And then came masters, where a lot of life happened in such a way that it made it difficult to even finish in record time. And
Mm.
that's also part of the journey. It's not just as clean cut as you have the bursary, you have the opportunity to study. Surely then a lot of burdens are alleviated. No, in my case, my dad fell ill in that year
Mm.
that I was doing my master's, and it's actually 2010 World Cup year as well. So
Yo.
distractions that made it hard to also just focus on what you needed to do, because even the academic calendar had to shift a bit
Yeah.
for what was happening nationally in the country. So not as drastically as what we've seen during the pandemic, but it definitely meant more pressure for what studies look like. But then the research part of it took me longer than I had anticipated. So I did my master's research in employee well-being, working with paramedics specifically all around Gauteng. Gathering that data wasn't an easy thing when you don't have a car, and also you're working with people who work shifts. So they need to be completing questionnaires and things like that in a time that they are also most attentive and also most available. A very hard thing in the world of emergency medical services, because you never know what will actually come your way. And it was a much difficult journey, and it took me 4 years actually to do my masters. And along the way, I must say, I felt like giving up as well, because it honestly felt like, my word, what did I sign up for? What is this actually? But when you are passionate and resolved in doing what you set your mind out to do, the energy comes back at different points in the journey, and you find yourself actually remotivated again to continue. So no, I didn't finish in record time, but I am glad that I didn't lose out on my bursary, and there was some understanding just from that point of view in terms of what support can look like. So mentoring has definitely played a big role in my life, in a sense that without that, I am convinced that I probably wouldn't have completed my master's or wanted to still work in the psychology field or feel like it was worth pursuing.
Yeah. And I mean, you're sharing quite a lot of useful knowledge because I mean, you think you grew up in Rustenburg, where in your head potentially you had a lot of ideas what you wanted to do for the community, and an
Mm-hmm.
incident happened in your life that moved you to another place.
Mm.
Now you meet with different challenges, different realities, and your aspiration change. So I'm
Mm.
quite curious. I mean, in this journey, and you've said quite a few times that it's not a straight line journey that you can define clearly. What has kept you going? Like, what has been some of the things that motivated you to focus and still push ahead?
Mm. I think a big part of it is definitely my parents' desires. So, not necessarily for them to feel like they have lived out their dreams through me, because I feel like they definitely motivated me to realize that whatever work looks like or whatever opportunity looks like,
Mm,
appreciate that and find contentment in that as you try new things. So I think they definitely helped me to understand how work isn't a job necessarily,
yeah,
and that even finding meaning, you have to motivate yourself to see that meaning in the work that you do, whether it is as a domestic worker, whether it is at a boardroom table, whatever it looks like. Grab the opportunity with both hands. But I think God has definitely played a big role in my life in terms of what does hope look like for me. I became a believer in my varsity years while staying at res and all of that. And I think that definitely anchored me, because when you are studying, sometimes it doesn't always feel like a lot of people in your world understand,
yeah,
how difficult or challenging that is. And yes, friends can relate, but family not as much. But they definitely rooting for you and supporting you. So I found that God definitely gave me that hope to continue and to really pursue uh, what I had embarked on, even when the disappointments hit. I was never aiming for cum laude at master's level because I saw that, hey, the situation is real. Like, this is flaming. When it starts just becoming about can I finish, and even with the disappointments, because I mean my parents never got to see me graduate with that master's degree. So my father passed on in 2013, and I graduated and got my degree in 2014. So when people have invested so much in terms of the people who know you best from birth, in essence, and they don't necessarily see what even this industrial psychology that was difficult for me to explain to them what it looks like practically now that I am working. And also, I suppose, not being able to do the things that I had hoped I would be able to do for my parents, because my mother didn't see me graduate with my undergrad. She passed on in my second year, and then my father just before I graduated with master's. So he got to see a little bit more, got to benefit a bit from my small intern salary, because that's also the other thing about these things. Postgraduate doesn't necessarily mean that the money automatically comes your way. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, getting a started is not that much anyway. So.
Exactly. So get yourself to work, maybe afford to pay for where you're staying, but there's always uh, that dream of, okay, what will it actually look like when I finish? And that's also something that probably motivates you, the curiosity of, okay, I know that this isn't for forever, so when I finish, I'm sure opportunities will open up, or I'm sure that the world of work will have so much more to offer me, but it also isn't always that clear. So having support is what has motivated me as well, from friends when I even wanted to abandon the psychology route, or even when I was questioning whether the sacrifices that I chose to make were worth it.
Yeah. And I mean, in my head, there's a question of resilience that's hitting me. So you spoke about a cum laude in your undergrad. Seemingly in your second year, that's when you said you lost your mom, which would have been a tough thing, being a female and being raised by a single father. And for what I'm hearing you say as well is you've also been trying to help um, him in different aspects of his life as well. So how did you? And I also heard you speak about your belief that you got anchored by believing in God, and I'm sure you had a support system from a church perspective as well. Um, how did you, before we get into how you dealt with that part in your life, how did you convince your parents that industrial psychology is the way to go? I mean, I'm sure they had dreams. They thought maybe you could be a doctor or a lawyer, or any of those common qualifications. How did they buy this industrial psychology idea?
Mm. That is actually such a valid question, because in my dad's case, he almost felt like washing his hands of the situation, because he's like, after all of this, you are bringing a very abstract sounding thing that doesn't really sound like, it's that established in South Africa. On my mother's side of things, she was a firm believer that if I really am passionate about that, and if I'm really convinced that I will be dedicated to the process, and especially now that I have a bursary, she was more for accountable action, where my father was more convinced by the facts. So I actually needed to do the research and explain it better. And all of that actually helped to convince them somewhat that, okay, maybe there is a career of this. It was difficult when there weren't actually people in my community who I can say, but this person is doing this very job, or is pursuing this career. It's actually only round about my second year when I started doing vocational work, where they could then get a realistic idea of what does this entail? Because I was doing that vocational work at the company that had offered me a bursary, and I was talking about work-related things and business-related things that started to make more sense. And I could tell them about, oh, actually, this is what it looks like in reality. So I think that's where it started to become a bit more real for them, because at the time when I was starting my first year, being a black woman or a black girl, then lots of bursaries were being offered for accounting. And then in the years that followed, it started becoming law and then engineering and the big STEM boom that we are seeing now. But at the time, if you were not choosing accounting, it almost seemed like, how do you look a gift horse in the mouth? Also, almost, how could you not pursue that, where it's almost like passion aside, this is the opportunity, or this is the thing that could get your family out of the situation that they're in, or this is the thing that could uplift your community. But I honestly feel like it wasn't anything that was strong enough for me to pursue as a passion or as an interest. Because I remember someone paying for career assessments for me, which I was quite appreciative of, and accounting came up as a thing, and almost as a career sponsor, it seemed like, okay, we've done the assessments, surely you have your answer now, go pursue accounting. The assessments have said it as well, but so I feel like maybe along the way I might have disappointed some people initially, but then the outcome of it, or once I was now doing an internship and I was then practicing as an industrial psychologist, I think that is when it proved worth the journey and proved worth the decision that I made years ago. So it's almost like we make career decisions as we go along, and we don't always see the full benefit of it until a few years later in some cases. And that's a hard thing to try and convince people of, especially African parents.
Definitely. I mean, yes, I can imagine. It's hard for me to even explain to my parents what I'm trying to study. Let alone try to figure out why am I not going the traditional route or the simple way that everyone could see you'll make money if you go that way. So it's quite interesting to hear. And maybe one other thing I'm quite curious about, Ash, is you talk a lot about support structure, your passion, and you're quite clear, right, in your mind, based on the research that you did, which direction did you want to go? What inspired that direction for you? So, what landed for you to say, oh, this is definitely what I want to
do? I think a big part of that for me, Itu, has really been the nation building aspect to it. So when you have felt the inequalities of what society looks like, what life looks like, and even what work looks like, my story hasn't necessarily always been an easy one to tell because of the experiential learning of seeing it live, whether it was me helping my mother finish off dishes just so that, we can spend more time together and she can knock off earlier, or whether it's another Christmas where we are separated because my dad needs to work or he needs to be more on the business side. And at the time, it involved transporting people's goods from Johannesburg to Polokwane in Rustenburg, where my grandmother was at the time. So instead of making it a wasted trip, let's make it a business opportunity, but it also means spending time apart. So because of those hardships, I think I started thinking more and more about what does my career need to mean? It has to mean that there's a difference in the community that I'm in, regardless of where I am. It does need to mean that it's contributing to Africa's development even, because if we as young people are not the ones, actively pursuing these things and actively engaging in initiatives that will actually change the narrative in Africa, what else is going to happen, how much is really going to change. And I think on the psychology side of it, when I started seeing that people actually spend so much of their lives in work endeavors and pursuing different ventures or in jobs and roles, what does looking for meaning look like, and what does growth and realization of potential look like? So I think that actually ignited the flame for me in terms of what my contribution can look like. So for me, one of the things I started realizing that it's not about a linear progression. It's not about, joining an entry level uh, job and then work yourself up to a certain position. That's not the only pathway,
Yeah.
it has to be broader than that. Now, I'm a liker of things, and being so curious and interested in different things, I realized that you actually can't get all fulfillment from one particular role or one particular job. There's opportunity to do work that doesn't always pay, or sometimes can be a second income generator, depending on how you look at it. We're talking about entrepreneurial abilities, and we're hearing about 21st century skills, and all of that being what will help people to really contribute their best and their most in workspaces. But it's not going to be in a single job. That's one thing that I started to realize. So um, I write poetry and do that on the side. I've started a well-being initiative on the other hand as well. And I've started to see how alive these things are starting to become in ways that I did not even foresee 2 years ago or even 5 years ago. So for me, it's not being too focused on what the 5-year plan or 10-year plan needs to look like, because it might not even unfold that way. Opportunities might come in totally different directions, and your context requires you to give back to it and adapt in a way that your career will actually not progress
Yeah.
necessarily the way that you envisioned, but still the things that you prioritize, if you set your mind on further studies, still pursue that if the opportunity comes around. Or if you set your mind on an executive role, still pursue that, but realize that there's more to work than just what one single position or job can offer.
Yeah, I actually like that idea. So you're quite clear of the impact you want to make in society and community, and you didn't want to force yourself into a systemic approach that says grow from a linear position of bottom up,
Yeah.
or laterally, whichever route you might take, but explore different avenues where you
Mm,
have opportunity to make an impact in the community, and that's what you're looking after, which is awesome. Uh,
mm,
I really like that analogy. It helps us think a little bit broader than just my own ambitions of where I want to go, but what impact am I looking to do?
mm.
What am I doing in society? So, looking at that, what do you do in your job today that helps you with that sort of goal or purpose that you
Mm. So I started out in consulting psychology, where my clients were organizations, the teams, and the people in there, and a wide range of things from psychometric assessments all the way through to personal development, leadership development, culture and well-being type of work. And that's where my career really solidified. I had leadership opportunities there, but then I started also wondering what lies beyond that. So I moved into higher education, and that's currently where I am now, because I enjoy working with young people. And for me as well, I feel like even just for my psychology profession, there is opportunity to develop and contribute to the professional development as well of the field per se. So hence, I found myself in higher education, where I started as a program coordinator, overseeing different programs that would be training our people in applied psychology, to then go on and work in a professional or non-professional capacity, which I think is also very important if the broader mental health promotion and that focus is so needed in our country, and just looking at the world and how COVID-19 has even impacted people, where if we are saying the second wave or the second curve to flatten is mental health, and the effects of COVID or what happens, life afterwards, then both professional and non-professional roles definitely have to play a factor there. But then my current role then, which I moved into last year, has
have?
to do with program development. and I'm overseeing programs in the Faculty of Management and Leadership at the educational institution that I work with. And part of that involves curriculum design and development, including decolonizing of curriculums and making it contextually relevant to South Africa, and what does taking what we have into the world look like from a coaching perspective, from a human resource management perspective, and then the other newer stream is business management. So it's a very diverse mix of programs that I develop content for. And then there's also stakeholder engagement and things like that. So I also tend to do quite a lot of interviews and write articles, particularly looking at helping students with their own mental well-being and psychosocial well-being while they are studying, and even as they transition into postgraduate and when they transition out of studies into the world of work. And they're starting out. So I remember you did mention, what does graduate development look like? It definitely means helping students to not only gain access into higher education, but also transition out of that into the world of work. And also when people don't have opportunities to study, what does skills development look like? So a lot of my work also has to do with making sure that programs are actually equipping people to be more competent in what they need to do, whether as entrepreneurs or whether as workers in a particular organization.
Awesome. And you were touching on a very important aspect of well-being, and more specifically mental well-being. I think it's one of the underrated things in society currently. I think everyone in society assumes for as long as you can get through the structures of education, you are mentally prepared for university, you are mentally prepared for life, for corporate, and so go and conquer. Um, and I'm interested a little bit in what you spoke about on the well-being initiative that you're doing. Is it focusing on helping people with that awareness around mental well-being, and what does that mean? Or can you share a little bit about what you're doing in that space?
So in that space, for me, what's most important and the gap that I started realizing is just how when it comes to well-being, people tend to think that it's only at the critical stages when you maybe need to now see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And already people have, perceptions about that. So it's already a space where there's a lot of stigma. Add cultural aspects and beliefs and all of that, and it's even further stigmatized. And I just felt like one of the things that I wish I had more of when I was studying, or even just in life at an earlier stage, was just access to resources that would help me to either cope with the everyday things, whether it's anxiety, whether it's insomnia, whether it's stress management and burnout, or whether it is even things like in a work role when you're experiencing so much performance related pressure that you actually aren't as effective as you could be. You could be overworking or losing motivation and underworking. So my idea really with the initiative that I have in mind and currently pursuing is honestly to make these resources more available to people. And it has involved posts on LinkedIn and various social media platforms every Wednesday, for example, where the focus is solely on well-being. It could be work-related or could be just life in general. So a lot has also come from hearing what people are seeing as needs. So some of those people are the students that I work with, but some of the people are my own family members or friends as well. And the more I started to do that, I've just found that people have shown appreciation for that in a way that has surprised me, because the things that you think are obvious, maybe because of my training in psychology, you don't actually think that this could be something that's helpful to someone. So that's where it has really been for me, just in terms of what can that look like in a more relatable way, in a way where we know people cannot afford necessarily to see a psychologist, and there's a place and time definitely for someone to really consult and get professional assistance and help in whatever they're struggling with, whether it's depression, anxiety, suicidality or anything like that, but there's the other in between stuff that people don't necessarily look at. What could be holding me back in terms of things that I'm not paying attention to when it comes to my own well-being, or whether it comes to collective well-being? Like, what are the things that are impacting us so much societally that we can't ignore it, be it gender-based violence, be it racial injustices, or really as a young person not feeling like there are even enough places for funding for you to pursue career or even study, if you can even make it into a lot of institutions now. It's a very difficult thing. So I'm almost trying to answer the well-being questions that people probably have, but have not always known where to get those resources or what to make of it, how to process what they're feeling and thinking.
Sure, that's fantastic. And if for example, we want to know more about it, you said we must just check you out on social media,
Mm.
and potentially Wednesdays. That's when you do more sessions for people to get more awareness as well.
That's correct. So on both my LinkedIn page as well as Facebook page, on a Wednesday, you would be seeing a lot of that type of activity. And I'm hoping that it will grow. What it will look like, I don't know, because it's still so new.
Yeah,
And I'm enjoying the newness of it, but I'm also seeing how more is actually needed in that space. So I definitely will be taking it
yeah.
to different avenues and seeing how it can really benefit our different communities in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think it's a topic on its own, this issue of well-being. And it'll be nice to actually see how it evolves,
Mm,
and potentially how you start putting content together just to bring a little bit more awareness. Because I
yeah.
do suspect people are scared to think about it. But being in lockdown, more and more we're in touch with ourselves. We can see there's certain things that have been affecting us negatively that we haven't really come out to say. We don't know where to go. But again, it's
Mm,
what we shared around the stigma around these issues.
mm,
People are feeling scared that you might be told, go see a psychologist or go see a psychiatrist, or
mm, mm,
you might have to be on medication for stuff. So now people are getting very anxious about that, and that can also put you in a difficult space to be. So I like the initiative idea that you're talking about, and potentially creating awareness that it's not as scary as the world makes it out to be, uh,
mm.
and potentially there's help, even in just understanding yourself a little bit more and understanding when to go find professional help. What does it mean to get professional help as well?
That's true.
Yeah, it's quite a powerful thing that you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm also liking the work that you said you did around, or that you're busy with as well now with young people at school, helping them with their studies, different curriculums that you guys are putting in place. Uh,
Mm,
and I like that idea of aspects of bringing Africa into some of our learning and how we do things as a continent, or culturally how we build and how we think. We don't hear a lot about that in some of our formal education systems and
mm,
so I'm excited about that as well. So you've spoken a lot about your career, a bit about yourself, and I'm quite curious. What are some of the challenges in your profession that you're experiencing, that you could share? Um, and I think you've shared some of them, but do you have any additional ones that you, if you think about, you'd want to highlight to say, being an industrial psychologist, these are some of the things that you'll find as pitfalls, and watch out for them, or potentially this what you could do about
mm. Definitely, Itu. So one of the things that for me has always been quite a difficult space to navigate is the whole idea around when is your experience considered enough
them. Yeah,
for you to grow in a certain direction in your career, or even take on certain uh, job roles or even new responsibilities. Because definitely in psychology, the longer you've practiced, the more you've learned, the more you've been exposed to, and the more you have to offer in any role that would be considered more senior or has more responsibility now. However, I found that imposter syndrome definitely is a factor. So the very factor that you would maybe think that you don't have enough to offer, because you're only maybe looking at one aspect of it. So I'll give an example. So in my case, organizational development and change management is probably the area that I've had the least exposure to in terms of having the opportunity to actively work in that space. But I've definitely worked on many projects in that particular space, and it can easily feel like that's probably an area that you shouldn't be approaching, or you shouldn't even, be looking at anything in that space. But for me, one of the things then that I started realizing probably a few years ago, about 3 years ago, is that you have enough experience to still progress and move forward and try new things and not feel afraid to try those new things, because with any part of a career, and even a job per se, there's always more to learn. So you come in with what you already know, but doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be almost able to do everything in that particular role for you to do it well. You can still learn very effectively while still contributing what you have. So that has definitely been one of the challenges that I've had to overcome in terms of when I'm wondering if this is an opportunity worth pursuing. It shouldn't be because I don't have any experience. The narrative you tell yourself in your mind, it should really be about, it's also an opportunity to learn. And you still have a lot that you're contributing. So that's one of the things that I think even young people end up getting caught in that trap in my field of feeling like, oh, but I don't know enough about this. If it really is something that interests you, upskill yourself, talk to people who are in those particular roles already, start learning from them. So that definitely helps. And another thing that I found as a challenge is that no one really tells you how long the journey is in psychology, and especially the journey to becoming a professional who's registered with the HPCSA. And that's one of the things that also doing, quite a bit of, in terms of how do we challenge that particular thing? How do we challenge institutions to make sure that they are truly, truly preparing people for postgrad, but also preparing them for the long journey of, there's still an internship, or you have to actually do a 1-year graduate program, or this and that, in order for you to get to that particular level. And in my case, it's only around honors year that I started to see that, okay, I've actually covered 4 years, but there's still a good 3 years that I need to put in of masters and an internship. So it helped me to prepare my mind for that in a different way. So those are definitely two challenges that I've encountered in my role, or even in my profession and field. But definitely things that you can overcome, and it's never actually too late to shift in the direction that you want to move in. A third challenge that people think is that you have to study full time, you have to do everything at once, which can be draining. If I wasn't on a bursary, I probably would have taken a bit of a gap year or taken a break from studies, because from my second year I was working and studying the whole time. And if you need to work, allow yourself to do that. If you need to maybe pause and come back to studies at a later stage, where you feel more ready, you have more motivation and energy to actually do it, it's okay to do that as well. So you don't have to actually do everything at one go for you to be considered successful, or really a psychologist who did things a certain way. So that's just some of the things from my field that I found quite interesting and challenging to navigate.
Awesome. And I think your story has been very inspiring, I must say. Listening to you, there's some parts that I felt like, sure, this is quite difficult. And I wonder how Ash managed to get through it. But I like how positive you've been, where you found the support structure to help you through, where you've also been honest about how you've navigated your way through those difficult times. Where we're not sure, to go do more research and have more understanding. And I guess all of that has groomed you to what you are now able to do in your career and the different options that you're busy with. Just one last thing I want to ask you about is the poetry thing. I was not going to let it go. So just out of interest, do you also write poetry? And if we're curious to see some of the poems that you have, where would we look at that?
All right then. So yes, I do write poetry. I think ever since I discovered Dr. Maya Angelou's work, and this is in primary school, which is also a bit of a heavy read for primary school, but
Yeah,
it uh, I think it brought me into a totally different world of what I have always found very interesting and have always enjoyed, which is creative language use and literature and all of that. So um, that is where my poetry journey started all the way in primary school. And now what it looks like is writing, performing poetry in some spaces. With lockdown, we actually don't have as much opportunity to be in the spaces where we would be able to engage with poetry that way. But I do have poetry that I share via my Facebook page and also on a YouTube channel as well. So just Ashley Modene, you would find just some of my poetry there as well. Um, and I actually have started to infuse that into my work as well. So a bit on LinkedIn, but mostly Facebook and on YouTube. That's where you would
yeah, fantastic. We'll definitely check it out. Ashley Modelo, you said, if you want to check it out on YouTube and your Facebook.
see. That's correct.
Okay, fantastic. I think it's quite exciting, and I really, really, really appreciate your time. I'm grateful to hear your story, and I believe it has encouraged quite a few young people, or most actually. And I will definitely be looking out for those wellness sessions and promoting them just to make sure that people are aware. I think it's an important aspect. And as you help society read more and understand more, definitely we'll be looking out for some of your poems. And as soon as lockdown finishes, come check you out. Hopefully, you'll be live at some point. Go check it out. So that would be awesome. And yeah, I think really, really continue the work that you're doing with the young people. Continue impacting them as positive as you can. I mean, the issue of inequality is not going to be solved by
Mm,
people. I think if we all come together, there's a lot that we can do, especially what you mentioned in the rural areas where we've kind of neglected and just
mm,
focused in townships where people have easy access. It would be nice to start creating streams where we can access people in the rural areas as well,
mm.
which will be helpful. Any final thoughts, things you want to say in closing?
All right. Thanks so much, Idmiling. It really has been a pleasure to join you today. And in closing, I would really say to any young person or anyone really who'd be watching this is dare to dream.
Yeah.
Honestly, do dare to dream. You might only have what feels like a handful of hope, and it doesn't feel like it will carry you for the whole way. But because it's not a straight line, you can still pause and rest along the way, but still don't give up on your dream and think that maybe it is bigger than you because it can look so different. It's a dream that unfolds, and in essence, you are the one who knows what you're wanting to pursue and what you're wanting to achieve. So don't allow yourself perhaps to be the reason you give up on those dreams, difficult as life is.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, Faber.
Thanks, you do.
Awesome.
Bye.
Cool stuff.